Oh, welcome everybody. I'm Nicole Santamaria, OT for Real Life, founder of Miami Handwriting, and today I'm so excited because I don't have to be here alone. I have Jeanette Graham. She is the host of Excuse My ADHD Podcast, and she's agreed to come on here and chat with us about ADHD, about executive function, more from the perspective of an adult. And we're going to look back at, when she was younger, what would have made a difference. And the goal here is we're hoping, both Jeanette and I have the same goal that we want to share as much information as we can with parents, teachers, adults that are dealing with ADHD, because the more that we know, the more that we share, the better off we're going to be able to support our kids. And if you are an adult, like I know Jeanette speaks to a lot of adults, you're going to be able to support yourself and give yourself the tools you need to function. So welcome, Jeanette. Thanks for coming. So I'll let you guys know just briefly how I met Jeanette, and then Jeanette, I'll give you a turn to give us, your feedback. So we met because I was on her podcast, right? And then we had a great conversation, and the podcast should be coming out next month.
It was supposed to come out yesterday. It's coming out tonight.
Oh, perfect.
I'm a day behind, but it just got
Jeanette. Nah, you're right on time. It's going to be a Jeanette and Nicole week for the world. So I really liked the message that she had, that she was speaking about having adult ADHD. And again, a lot of the families I deal with, and it's really that question of like, oh, do I need to do something? Do I intervene? Are they going to grow out of it? And I think if all of us, adults that, know, love, and work with kids, if we had like a crystal ball, we could fast forward to the future, right? Are they going to grow out of this smooth sailing? We just be like, oh, I'm going to let it play out. Or we would know to get intervention. So hopefully Jeanette can give us a sneak peek into the crystal ball of the future. And go ahead, Jeanette, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. And
okay. Well, like Nicole said, I have adult ADHD. I was diagnosed 3 years ago at the urging of my husband. He does not have ADHD.
That could be a whole other live we can do.
Right.
Boxes.
But, after diagnosing, I kind of went through this whole grief cycle. But then on the other side of it, it was like all of a sudden everything made sense. All of the differences that I felt growing up, all of the brokenness that I thought I was growing up, all clicked into place and everything started to feel like it made sense. I wasn't broken. I was just different. And there were other people that were just like me that were going through the same things, because I always thought I was alone.
Wow.
I always felt alone.
That's like, that right there is, I think as for you, it was such an eye-opening moment as to, wow. So fast forwarding to the parents that are listening or trying to navigate this with their own kids, I think hearing those words, you had some broken, as if that something was wrong with you. That's something that, your 8-year-old might not be able to put in words. Your 12-year-old might not be able to put in words. Your 17-year-old might not
act out because
they're hearing it, into the future, that you're able to put that into words. That's powerful. We always look at what's happening in the surface, right? Yeah. Their grades, we can't take them to dinner. They're always fighting with their siblings. They're a mess. They're forgetting everything. They're just organized. But that emotional component, it's like, I'm going to borrow this word from Penny Stack, and she calls it the lived experience, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure other people have used it, but the first one I heard the lived experience. And I think, this conversation is really rounding it out so that people understand the whole experience, So I'm grateful. High five for your husband for for getting you to go there.
Well, I'll tell you, it took a lot of convincing
For him to convince you
for me to believe that that was true.
that
Because
once
he wanted me to go, and I was like, no, I don't have it. Because the stereotypes, there's so many stereotypes. I wasn't the little boy in the classroom growing up that was hyper and causing trouble and being disruptive. I was the quiet girl in the back of the room.
It's kind of lost.
That didn't have a whole lot of friends, that just always was like daydreaming, I guess, what a lot of people refer to, sometimes as ditzy, because I was forgetful and I would do work and not turn it in, or I would halfway do it and then forget that I had another half to do because in my mind it was done. And so though I had to reconcile what was going on with my childhood with what I thought I knew ADHD was. And I was so wrong. Couldn't have been more wrong. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed and then diagnosed again and then diagnosed again.
3 times.
3 times by 3 different doctors, an online doctor, a psychologist, and my doctor, all of which, listened to my story and my childhood growing up, and were just like, oh, yeah, you do. You absolutely. And I was like, really? Are you sure? But I think, and I've heard the similar from a lot of adults who aren't diagnosed until later in life. And it seems to be more that way with those who are diagnosed primary inattentive rather than hyperactive. But there are some that are hyperactive that, they go under the radar too, because they have things to fall back on, like sports. And the sports and the physical activity helps counteract some of the symptoms.
Channels.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of times, when the life is so structured, sometimes it doesn't
show up until later. When you get into college is when a lot of teens are diagnosed, because they leave that structure of school and home life and they're on their own, completely on their own.
Yeah. And now we have an extra layer with, a lot of the college students who have online classes.
Mm-hmm.
You leave home, you leave any semblance of structure to not home, to no structure, because now you don't even have to go to class.
Have a schedule to go into class. You can just go on whenever.
Because some of these online classes, it's not like, you and me had a meeting today at 12.
Yeah, they're not all asynchronous. So you can go on and you can be on whenever.
Yeah. So I actually have 2 college students, and I talk to a lot of their kids, and they're all really struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have, true inattention or true ADHD symptoms and true executive function symptoms, then it's like exacerbated even more so.
Yeah.
I know. So anyways, we're doing our little piece. The more we talk about it, the more people are going to be like, oh, okay, maybe this is what's going on. I'm going to go back to our notes here just so I can, we've already had so many good conversations. We can end this now, and it would be
just throw the notes out. Who needs notes?
I know, because there's some things that I wanted to say, and I did want to touch upon that. But you had one of your podcasts. You talk about how you had to go to so many different doctors to get the right diagnosis. You also talked. I'm going to go back to this first, and then we'll get back to how you got the diagnoses. The other things that she shares in her podcast, which is Excuse My ADHD. So you share a little bit about how you had already kind of structured, and I think this was before you got your official diagnosis, you had already structured your life, that you got your MBA with an online program. You had your doctor online because you knew that time was always an issue for you, and that if it was online, you were, not going to forget, or less likely to forget.
Well, it wasn't just that too. It's also in person. You have all of these added things. You have to be ready on time. You have to leave the door on time. You have to account for traffic, all of these other executive functions, where for me, having the online doctor cut all that out.
Yeah, it cut off you having to backpedal, like, oh, my appointment's at 10. So having to think it's going to take me 15 minutes to get dressed. I have to do this. I have to do, So it's really 45 minutes to get there.
So instead of 45 minutes to get there, I just got to brush my hair and I'm on.
So I look at that like as like you are, and this was before you had your diagnosis. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Right.
that was the first doctor that I went to.
Okay, so you had kind of already put things into place just because you knew you struggled in certain areas. Maybe you didn't have the name for them.
I think there were some things, and I had tried so many things, so many different organizational things over the years, different calendars, different planners. They weren't all very successful because I didn't know what I was working with. I was doing neurotypical productivity with the non-neurotypical brain.
Yeah, and missing some of those, embedding some of those executive skills that would make it successful, right? Putting the system into place, the time awareness, working on those things that make them successful. Well, so all those I look at as you were, whether you knew it or not, you were already kind of tweaking your environment and creating experiences so that your executive function skills could help you.
Yeah, and the funny thing was I learned from my mom.
You know what?
I learned from my mom. So the joke is, because my mom can never be on time, that she would be late for her funeral.
Yeah. People like that.
Yeah. She's never been diagnosed, so we don't know. She may or may not be ADHD, but we always, every clock in the house was set ahead different. So you never knew what time it was. It was, one was set 15 minutes ahead, another one was 30 minutes ahead, another one was 45 minutes ahead, and then the cars were different.
Oh, good. Yeah.
My whole house was that way growing up because my mom could never be on time. And my dad, anytime we had to be somewhere, would always tell my mom the wrong time. So she would get there on time.
Get there on time.
Yeah. Or early.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you're like, I don't even know what time it is anyway. I'm just go. So I think that with this whole picture, if you have an official diagnosis of ADHD, inattentive, hyper, if you have, even though executive function disorder is not an official diagnosis, but if you know that that's what you have, changing the way you set up your life is, it's not all of it, but it's definitely a piece of the puzzle.
It's a pretty crucial piece. Learning what works for you, I think, is what's important about that. It's being able to take structures and adapt them, because that was one of the things I always ran into trouble with, was trying to follow things the way they were set up. Like time blocking is an example. I can't do time blocking the way time blocking is set up because my work doesn't allow for it. My life doesn't allow for it. I have too many fires come up during the day. So I can't have set structured little blocks. So being able to do a blend of time blocking, because there are certain periods of the day where nothing goes on, and I can do that.
Yeah.
With just a regular calendar where I can schedule things, but then
we can post it. Like,
works so much better for me, because the other way, trying to stay within those guidelines, it was causing me more anxiety than it was helping. So I think being able to adapt those structures is very important.
Yeah. I agree. A lot of times, obviously I work a lot with kids and middle schoolers and teenagers. It's really important to match the strategy, the system that you think is so magical with what's going to work for them, because then not only do they not get to accomplish whatever the skills you're working on, then we've just given them one more thing that they suck at.
Yeah.
Right. And that's already, like, they already experienced that enough throughout their day. And hearing you speak of, how you thought you were when growing up, it's confirmed. These kids are already doing so many things that they're bad at, they suck at, they forget, they can't do it.
Well, it's so that really constant, you're not living up to your potential is like probably one of the worst phrases you could ever use.
Right. Yeah. So it's really important to not only match it, but scale it back so it's so small that they're gonna get it, because
baby steps.
Yeah, that's small
baby steps that they can.
I'm a big
build motivation with, and that they can. To build that I can do it. Look, I did it. I did all of these things.
All you need is those I can do it experiences. Like, success creates wins. Find more wins. I'm a big fan of Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've read that book, James.
No, my husband hasn't. I haven't got to read it yet, though.
But he's a big proponent of that 1% of like stacking the steps to it. And it's really, that's the perspective. You want them to experience the wins so that they can be successful. So they can be like, oh, okay, yeah, like I suck at time management, or I can't tell time, or I'm always late, to, okay, well, I'm still always late, but guess what? Now I can, account for the time that predicts the time that somebody's going to take me to get it done accurately. Mm-hmm. And that will just create the wins. And that seems like that was a lot of what, you were missing as when you were growing up, not knowing why everything was so hard.
It was always, for me, it was always the, why can't I do anything right?
Yeah. And that's, so that part I think is really important. And then in addition to, in another one of your podcasts, you talk about, I think it's episode 2, actually getting the diagnosis and then the whole path of medication.
That was a very long path.
Yeah. And, I always am wondering, questioning, how is a 5-year-old, 8-year-old supposed to give you feedback on how they feel? I do know that sometimes they say, like, if you get the right medication, everybody will know, because it just automatically becomes like easier. It's like night and day, right? And there are those families that I've talked to, it was like night and day. I know one family that, they kind of thought they were waiting, but and finally, and he got a little older, maybe like 10, they gave him medication, and he was crying because he's like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. Like my life is so much easier now.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's like one success story out of so many people trying to get the medication. And so you went down the medication path as an adult, knowing, already having put some systems into place to make your life better. So just share, I know we could talk like for 45 minutes about the medication.
Well, just the best way to describe the medication journey is it is a roller coaster. It is an absolute roller coaster, unless you're lucky and you're one of those people that the first one you try is the one that's going to work. My DNA, because it's all going to, no one medication and dosage regimen is going to work for everybody. Everybody's body is different. My body processes things differently. I had the pharmacogenomic testing done, found out why a lot of medications weren't working for me, because I also have depression, but none of the medications ever worked. Well, my body metabolizes them too quickly. So they don't work. But with the ADHD medication, I got on one, atomoxetine. It's the Strattera. It's the one that there may be one more, but at the time it was the only one that was a non-controlled substance. And it worked. It was slow. It took months and months and months, but then it worked. And yeah, because you have to build that one up in your system, where the stimulants, they're in and out.
Right.
So immediately if they're going to work.
Okay.
And you're going to know pretty quickly if you're going to have side effects with those too. But the atomoxetine had to build up in my system. But once I got the Strattera built up in my system, found out that the reason it took me so long was because my body was metabolizing it again too quickly. So I was at almost a dangerous level, because it does affect your liver. It can affect your liver. And I've had liver issues in the past, so I had to come off that one, and it was working, and I wanted to cry because it was working. But then at the same time, I had this feeling in the back of my head, well, what if something else would work better?
Yeah.
Because you hear all these great stories about how wonderful the stimulants are. And so I tried one, and it was great. It was awesome. It worked like that. But the side effects, the trade-off wasn't there for me, because once it wore off, my anxiety level and my irritability was so high that I was like yelling and screaming at my kids for no reason.
I read that when in your show notes, and you were saying how you would have like a crash.
Yeah.
You would be so irritable. And then, and nobody really talks about those things,
Yeah. And my doctor, I had a good doctor, and she told me, she was like, okay, I'm going to give you this. but you may experience a crash. And boy, yeah, I did. And I could feel it come on because I would take it in the morning, and around the same time I was getting home, around 6 o'clock, I'd come in that door and my nerves were raw. My nerves were so raw. Everything annoyed me. Everything, it didn't matter what. My kid could come say hi to me and I was like, it wasn't feasible. And I had all this guilt because I was a bad mom. And so I couldn't do it. And it killed me because it was like magic, but it wasn't, because I had my give and take. And then I tried another one. I think it was Adderall. It didn't work at all. It did nothing for me. And I tried another dose of it, nothing. Because that was the other thing, is the one, even though you get on a medication, then you have to try the different doses, levels before you find out if one is really going to work or not. Because sometimes, like with Adderall, they're like, okay, well, if this dose doesn't work, then we'll try another one. And then you're like, if that one is too high, then you got to back it down. And that's what takes so long. And the roller coaster sometimes is that it's a lot of experimenting. And even with the pharmacogenomic testing, it wasn't like a magic thing. This is the one for you. I mean, it did lay out the reasons why the ones that weren't working. And it told me that, Concerta, the methylphenidate, was going to be my best match. And it is, but it was also the one that was going to have the highest risk of adverse side effects. And so at the end of trying everything else, it was like, okay, is it going to be worth it? You don't know. It's like a roll of the dice. So I tried it and it works. And I've been on it for a year now.
And that's the one that the pharmacological testing.
The pharmacogenomic testing said that was going to be my best match. But the thing about it was, the reason we didn't try that one right out the gate was because it also said that it had the biggest chance to have the most adverse effects.
Right.
But luckily, I have had very little adverse effects. I do get dizzy about an hour after I take it. That's the other thing, is a lot of the side effects of these medications are dizziness and nausea. And irritability. Those are the three big ones.
Right. So after your journey with getting to the diagnosis, then once you had the diagnosis, getting the right medication, you were able to find one.
Yeah.
Now that you're happy with
one. Yes, I am happy with it.
What and this might be a hard question. Like, what advice would you give to parents when they're going down this route? I mean, I'll tell you what I tell them. I always tell them to ask questions, because a lot of times what I hear is they just said, oh, give it to him, give him this dose, and then let me know how it goes. So ask, well, what does let me know how it goes look like? How do I know what it goes look like when it's going well? And how do I know what it looks like when it's going not well?
There's a lot of things they need to be looking into. I mean,
I have to really ask a lot of questions to know, because you went through this whole journey. So, again, I don't want to spend all this time.
The other thing is
one tip, one magical tip that you would tell parents to when they're going down this journey.
Research the side effects. That would be the biggest one. Make sure you know what side effects look like. There are going to be all kinds of articles and scholarly articles where they have had studies done with kids, and that they will tell you X number of kids acted like this, and this is what it presents like in this age group or this gender, because it's all different. The genetic makeup is different with boys and girls. It's a fact. I mean, I know you have trans kids, and it's going to be different from them too, because they're taking different hormones. So with everybody, it's all a matter of your genetic makeup. It's going to be different. So you can't say, oh, well, my kid's taking this is what you should expect, because it's going to be different. It's going to be trial and error, and it's going to take patience, and it's going to take listening to them and watching them, because you know your kid. And if all of a sudden your kids become a raging monster at 3 o'clock every day for a week, okay, maybe we should look at something else.
Yeah. But I find that when it's so obvious like that, obviously
Mhm.
parents are good at saying, okay, well, we just started this medication, this is happening, but sometimes it's not. So
Well,
it's
and
not.
sometimes it could just be them saying their tummy hurts.
Yeah. And then you have
Or
to,
if they don't know what being dizzy feels like, if they can't verbalize being dizzy, if they just start sitting down and not moving for a little while, that might be something. If they're used to playing, it's not as obvious, but I don't know. I think just watching and listening is a big thing.
Yeah. And I think this ties back into, I'm an occupational therapist. So everything I do, like I'm always looking at it through the lens of function, right?
Yeah.
How does this make the person function, right? So,
Yeah.
so if I have a little bit of a tummy ache and then, you have like a little tea or whatever, and then you go about your day, well, and the rest of the day was really good, well, then you outweigh the function.
Yeah. Because if, they're able to sit in class and listen, that's a big thing. Or if they're able to sit down and do a homework assignment without crying or
which really is
whatever.
we're able to experience more success.
Yeah.
Whether it's at home, school, playground, on the sports team, wherever.
You gotta weigh those.
They are.
That's
what I always.
I got a tummy ache, but if I eat,
if I have
an hour after I take it, and that tummy ache doesn't happen anymore, or after a couple of days, it's just like any other medication.
Yeah. So I'm always looking at everything through the eyes of function, and one of the things that I'm happy that I don't diagnose anybody, right? People sometimes they come with a diagnosis and sometimes they don't. Remember, but my lens is always in the scope of function. So, when families come to me or if they're in any of my online programs, we're always backpedaling to like, okay, well, how does this impact function? If they have trouble with their working memory, okay, well, so what? We need to figure out how it's impacting their daily life so that then
if they're on the medication, are they remembering to brush their teeth without being prompted every morning?
Yeah, little things as simple as that, and again,
they go out of the room with a task and come back with that task completed without having to come back and ask what they were doing.
Yeah, so I usually try and concentrate on the three things: is making the task small enough so that they're going to be successful at it. And then making sure that the task has something to do with something that they actually care about. Because if we want them to practice success and practice winning while they're practicing this skill, we really want to tap into what do they like. Like I have an example of organizing Pokemon cards, and then the mom's like, "But this isn't going to help." Like, well, once their brain, it's twofold. We want their brain to. We want to change the environment, but we also want their brain to practice the skill because that part of their brain it's muscle, it'll get better. So we want them, if he can get good at organizing and categorizing his Pokemon cards, this is a few years back.
Pokemon's still a thing, I think.
Is it? I don't know. I guess
my brother used to do Pokemon when he was little, so it's been around forever.
Yeah, I feel like it's been around forever. So then he already knows that his brain knows how to organize, categorize. So when he has to do those index cards for study guides or index cards for a research paper, we can say, hey, remember when we organized the Pokemon cards? Not so fun, but you know how to, set it up in the outline topic. So that's a lot of what I feel really helps. And again, I get families that have a diagnosis, don't have a diagnosis, but I'm always looking at how are they going to function. So I really like how you've brought together, you sprinkle it throughout your podcasts, things that you've done to make your life better, which is what I consider, you took your executive functioning skills and you did more of what you were good at. And then you tried to scaffold and support areas that were really difficult for you.
Still a work in progress.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like they say that they develop until 25, but really they stop developing at 25, but it doesn't mean that we can't make them better as we get older. Right. And then the other part of the equation is, you did have somebody following you. You did go the medication route. So you kind of took both pieces together.
You have to, because you can't just depend.
That's what I want to do.
You don't want anybody to think medication's the end all be all. Yeah, it can feel like a magic pill and a wonderful thing, but what it does is it levels the playing field for you.
Oh my gosh, I love that
everything being so hard to being about where it is for everybody else. but you're still going to have to work. That's why they say that exercise is so important, because it helps with the serotonin development, production, and, meditation, yoga.
Yeah, there's like some hard clinical research on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a study done where they had people do meditation for workshops, and they were able to increase their executive function. And it happened over the course of, I can't remember how many weeks, but it does increase your executive functioning.
Yes.
You can physically rewire your brain.
You can. You can. So, I do think that the perfect combination is both. And, if, medication is a route you need to go, don't feel like, oh, I'm copping out because you're trying to
make sure you try everything else before you go to medication route. But there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with doing it holistically and trying that way first. And if it works, great, because it's kind of like a spectrum. It's not officially a spectrum, but everybody's symptoms are different. Some people I've met are able to really well manage their symptoms without medication. They do strict dieting and exercising, and they have really good organization and structures built into their life.
They probably spend a lot of time improving their executive functioning skills in combination with brain hacks like exercise and nutrition that would really make a difference on all those hormones
then there's others like me who I tried and I couldn't do it. It helped some, but it wasn't enough for what I needed. So I went to the medication, and now I try and do both. And do I fail and do fall down and still screw up? Yeah, all the time. But eventually I pick myself back up and I get back onto the exercise and the food and everything else, and I go on. But it's a whole lot easier now than it ever was before. And I'm not falling down so hard that I feel like a failure. It's like I'm falling on like, oh crap. And then here I go again.
Yeah. So now it's kind of like, what it's about. You're like, okay, I'm just going to sit here for a little bit. And then I know what I need to do to get back.
And I just pick up and go again. And then, even some of those structures are going to get old, because that's one thing that we do. We get bored. So we're always looking for the
novelty, right? That dopamine.
Like an app that works for a while, after maybe 2 years, you want nothing to do with that app again. So you got to find something else.
Right.
But it helps keep you interested.
Sure. So one of the things that I'm going to put down here, I still have like 2 more questions to ask you, but I'm going to put down here the link to Jeanette's podcast, and I'm going to put down a link to, I have an executive functions guide. And what I did with that is I listed it's 11 executive, some people say 8, some people say 11. I just listed them all out, a brief description of what they, their definition. And then, here's what it looks like when everything's going smooth sailing. And here's what it may look like when it's kind of falling apart. So the goal is I want people to be comfortable with it. Like, sometimes I feel executive function is kind of more like a household term, but you'd be surprised. A lot of people are still like, oh, what does that mean? Like,
I didn't know what it was even after I first was diagnosed, until I started reading.
Yeah. So sometimes I call them thinking and doing skills. And it's just the mentality. The mission is like, I want people, teachers, parents to be like, okay, well, these things get better. So if I have, this child that like their backpack is always exploding, well, how can I embed some organization skills into my everyday classroom? So they can look at it as more like, oh, this is just like one piece of the dynamic of this child that is developing that can get better. Like the magic word is it can get better.
Yeah. And I think addressing it when they're younger like that and being able to have that head up can make all the difference. Difference.
I'm going to share this quick story. One time I go into a lot of schools, and one of the schools that I went to, this teacher, she's just like, I'm walking through the class and like all the desks are the same. These are weird things that I do when I go into classroom. I look into the desks, like who's the messy kid? What do the binders look like? The backpacks, everybody's was the same. They had like these big binders and I would just pull them out very casually. I was just like a guest visiting the class and every binder was the same. It had like the dividers, the same color. And then she had like the timer so that they could start learning how to be aware of time, because quick little side note, like I think they only teach time in first grade and it's like a 1 week lesson. And
that's a really short lesson.
Catch me if you can, kids. The whole world.
It's not even really helping them grasp what time is. It's just telling time. It's just being able to read a clock.
I forget the statistic that like maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago or when I was growing up, like time was like, it was like a whole part of our development and our learning. But anyways, so I had a quick chat with her and she's like, yes, we've been working on this since the beginning of the school year and we still work on it. It was already, springtime. We still work on it every single day because they need, I know, I was like, oh my gosh, this is magical. They still need that every single day. And I think a lot of times that's what we forget, that once we introduce a system, they still need that support. It's kind of like the organizing people that, they come in and they do magic, but the part that nobody talks about is the maintenance piece.
Oh yeah. I'm like, I can organize like it's my job, but keep organized.
And that's the thing that we want for our kids. Yeah. So I'll drop your podcast information in the text when I get off. I don't want to touch anything because I don't want to disconnect. And I'll drop the name to that resource so that you guys can grab it and start getting familiar with everything. But Jeanette, I guess like really quick, like I don't know, what do you wish that, parents and teachers would take away from what you've shared? Your experience, I think you were very real with us and I really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. What's the one thing you would wish for parents and teachers that are, working with and loving little ones or not so little ones, we're talking middle school, high schools that are dealing with these issues? If you can just say one. It's like a wish. Like you had a magic wand and you could just be like, boom.
You don't always have to understand why. Something I've learned myself recently is there isn't always going to be a why for them. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you? They don't always know. So patience is going to be big. Just understanding and loving and knowing they're not doing this on purpose. They're not doing it to you. It's nothing to take personally, because I think my parents took it personally, that the things that I was or wasn't doing was to them, but it wasn't, or I was spiteful to my teacher and not turning my work in. I didn't know why I was doing it. I knew I needed to do the work, but I wasn't doing it. And I think if I'd had somebody, because my parents were young and it was the 80s and one was working a night shift and one was working day shift. So they weren't, how would they know?
So be patient, know that it's not intentional. So almost like take it as a matter of fact, like, oh, and I think that's
okay.
But that's what I was going to chime on to. Was then we take away.
There still needs to be responsibility, and there still needs to be accountability.
We take away that blame piece, like, oh, you did it on purpose.
And
right. And then we when we do that, we add shame, we say it's your fault, we get really pissed off, which makes our brain not function and use all the tools we know. So I think that's really valuable, because then we can just kind of be like, as a matter of fact, and be like, oh, okay, so like problem solve. Okay, why did this happen? How can we do it different next time? Like what went wrong? Not why did you do this, but why did this actually?
How can we fix it going forward? What do you need?
Yeah, and those questions are very important to go through with them, as long as they're supported. Like, what do you need for next time? What can we do differently? Versus, oh, why did you do this again? Like, that's not helpful. Like,
because I can tell you, I was asked that question about 1 million times, and every time my answer was, I don't know. And I was always told, I don't know is not good enough. But
And
that
you
was
really,
the only
and you really didn't know.
I didn't know.
Yeah. All right. So
It's frustrating on parents too.
it's really hard for the parents. It's hard for the teachers. It's hard for the staff.
Everybody.
It's hard for me when I come in and I'm like, oh, please don't take away their recess because they really didn't mean it. And if you take away his recess now, he's going to be even more harder for him to sit down in the end of the day. But at least I think that's a good advice to walk away from. So for those of you that are watching the replay or watching it here, this is Jeanette Graham. She is the podcast host of Excuse My ADHD, and you can find it in all of the podcast places, like Spotify, iTunes. I know now even Audible.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere.
Podcaster, Stitcher, wherever.
There's so many now. And I'll link.
No, there used to only be a few, and now there's like 50.
I'll link it to the post once we're done here. And I'm Nicole Santamaria, and you can find me at OT for Real Life. And I'm going to drop that executive functions guide so that you guys can go ahead and download it and start.
I will give you the link to your episode tonight.
Oh, yeah. And then I'll be sharing again about when my podcast comes out. So it'll be like a Jeanette and Nicole feast for the end of the month.
Who couldn't want anything? I mean, come on.
It'll be like a big.
It's like a smorgasbord.